Good evening to you that are tuning in a little bit later. We're glad that you're going to tune in. We're going to be in Daniel chapter 3. So if you want to grab your Bibles and turn there, the notes should be available to you hopefully as soon as we can make them up there. Good evening, everyone. So I'm just curious, did everybody come because we were having tacos tonight? Or did everybody come just because you wanted to be here? Yeah. I was talking to Linda. She's like, we had over 100 people come through dinner. That's the most we've ever had. It's crazy. It's amazing. Yeah, it was really good. She's got such a fantastic crew. So is that what it was? Because we had ice cream? Yeah, I didn't get any. I'm glad you're here. If you needed notes, the notes are in the back. We're printing more. They'll be in here in just a minute. Got you covered. Oh, they're out? We're all out? Okay. And there goes the disruptor. Good. So Daniel chapter 3, we are moving along. This is such a great story that we're going to look at tonight. Just as a reminder, next week we'll be hopefully in Daniel chapter 4. The following week, we will not be having class because we're having a church picnic over on the Upward property, just like we always do. It's the kind of the end of the year, end of the dinner. We're going to have just a big picnic and a fellowship together, so we will not be in Daniel chapter 4 or 5 that week. But then we'll resume the following week all through the summer as much as we possibly can. So does that make sense to everybody? Everybody good with that? Take a little break, have a little picnic, have a little fellowship. No dinners throughout the summer. No, that'll be your last dinner, Bob. No more food for Mr. Bob. But I know who you live with, and she's a pretty good cook, so I think you'll be okay. Well, I've been watching you over the last year and a half, and you are sure not suffering, I can promise you. All right, let's pray, and we will get into Daniel chapter 3 before Mr. Bob gets into any more trouble. God, you are good, and I love to hear the chatter. I love to hear the laughter. I love just the fellowship of what you're doing here. God, it is all because of you and only because of you that we have the sweet spirit here. And I pray that you would help us to diligently protect it with everything that we have. And that really begins with making sure we're living the way that we're supposed to be living and going after you. And thank you for what we're going to study tonight. God, what an example of with Hannah, Michelle, and Azariah. And the choices that they made in the face of great adversity, and what a lesson it is for us and a challenge for us. Pray that you would enlighten us, give us wisdom and understanding tonight. I pray that you would guard our conversation, guard how we hear things and how we say things. And most importantly, may we just see you and experience you tonight. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, Daniel chapter 3. We're going to start with the first 7 verses, and then we will get into our notes. Chapter 3, verse 1, Nebuchadnezzar, the king, made an image of gold, whose height was 60 cubits and its width 6 cubits. He set it up in the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. And King Nebuchadnezzar sent word to gather together the satraps, the administrators, the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the judges, the magistrates, and all the officials of the provinces to come to the dedication of the image which King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. So the satraps, the administrators, the governors, the counselors, the treasurer, the judges, the magistrates, and all the officials of the provinces gathered together for the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. And they stood before the image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Then a herald cried aloud. And here's what he says. To you it is commanded, O peoples, nations, and languages, that at the time you hear the sound of the horn, flute, harp, lyre, and psaltery, in symphony with all kinds of music, you shall fall down and worship the gold image that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast immediately into the midst of a burning fiery furnace. So at that time, when all the people heard the sound of the horn, flute, harp, and lyre in symphony with all kinds of music, all the people, nations, and languages fell down and worshiped the gold image which Nebuchadnezzar had set up. We are very familiar with this story. We've probably heard it taught when we were in Sunday school, heard it preached on more than once, I am certain. But this story unpacked in a neat way for me as I was studying it and reading through the commentaries that I study with. Just a lot of cool insights. So we're going to talk about this first section of notes is just through 1 through 7. Dave, are you playing with my voice tonight? All right, so after the interpretation of the dream took place, Daniel and his 3 friends were elevated to places of prominence. So that's kind of a reminder of where we are. We got the dream. Daniel beseeches or goes to the king and says, hey, don't kill us all. We'll come back with an explanation of this. He goes to his buddies. They pray. They seek the Lord. God gives Daniel the vision. He goes back. He saves their lives. And because of that, Daniel is elevated with great power and authority. But then Daniel also speaks up and says, well, it wasn't just me. I've got these other men, these 3 guys, Hananiah, Azariah, and Mishael. They are just as a part of this as I am, and they are elevated. Not to the quite level that Daniel is, but they have now some power and authority. Well, between 2 and chapter 3, there could be a lot of time that has passed. We always read it as it's the very next event. But we're going to see in our notes that it probably was not. It jumps to a story of Nebuchadnezzar building an image. This image could have been of his father. I'm not going to practice that name. You can make it up however you want. We'll just say Nabo. It could be, it is rumored, it's believed that this image was an homage to his dad. We're not sure what it was. Could have been an homage to Baal, which is just another god of Babylon. Most believe, and what I tend to agree, is that it was of himself to celebrate his own power and his own authority. And he does it in order to give glory to the gods for his great success. And he builds this massive, massive image. This image was 90 feet high. 90 feet high. Think about that. That's not short. That's really tall. But it's only 9 feet wide. That's really tall and skinny. If I'm going to build something that I want to stand for a long time and not be blown over, I'm going to build a really wide base. But he builds this thing with a skinny base, a 9 foot wide all the way up. And it is in the image of someone, most likely Nebuchadnezzar. Now, this next guy, it was extremely tall and skinny. It was seen from afar. So it was built in the plains of Dura. They say plain of Dura is kind of like almost like an airport, just wide open, flat, and goes forever. So with this 90-foot tall, massive image that's gold, it's going to shine, and it's going to be able to be seen for miles, forever. And so when you think about when you're driving over to New York City, you're coming up from Jersey, up 95, what do you see? You see all the tall buildings, right? And you can see them from very far away. Basic idea is he wanted to be noticed. He wanted to be seen. He wanted this image to be important. And so Opert is an archaeologist. This is in my readings. He has discovered a brick foundation in this plain, or at what they call the mounds of Dura. So in the same vicinity, they have discovered lots of different mounds, or different places that could have been used as a statue holder. But this one is 45 foot long and 20 foot high. So it's a massive pedestal for something to be sat on. They can't prove that that's what it is. There's no direct evidence, but it fits the motive of what was being done here. So they just believed that it was to hold the appearance of a pedestal of some sort. And it's also said that this image was made of pure gold. Now, that could be that it was literally pure gold from inside to outside all the way through. Most believe that it was most likely gold-plated. That's what I would tend to believe, is that it was most likely gold-plated. Either way, it was very opulent, and it was a waste of a precious metal to build this 90-foot image, 9 foot wide. Now, because it was gold-plated, or most likely gold-plated, it helps us in understanding this dream. Remember the dream? What was the head of this vision that he saw? What was it made of? Gold. And what did it represent? I'm so proud of you. You guys are listening so well. It was to represent his kingdom, Babylon. And so he's the head of this thing. Now, if this statue was built right after the interpretation of the dream, it would make sense that he wants to establish this portion of the vision of, well, I'm going to go ahead and get ahead of the game, and I'm going to show my power and authority, and I'm not just going to build this image with just a gold head. The whole thing's going to be gold because I'm the most powerful man in the world. It fits. We can't make sure that that's the accurate thing, but it is an assumption we can make. He calls all the leaders in. And here are the leaders, the satraps. These are the admins, the guardians or watchers, the chief representatives of the king. These are the main guys. These are the ones that are watching out for the king to make sure he's protected. The prefects, these are the commanders or the military chiefs. The governors, presidents or governors of civil government. So this is not just in Little Babylon. This is all over the conquered world that he has taken over. He's calling all these important people in. The counselors, which are the government or chief arbitrators. The treasurers, the ones in charge of the public treasury. The justice, the lawyers or guardians of the law. The magistrates, the judges who give out the just sentence. And then it makes an interesting statement. It says, all the officials. So if there's any that were left out, if there are any other important people that need to be called into this thing, he's getting them right here. These are the governors of the province subordinate to the chief governors. So the mini rulers, maybe the mayors of the little towns that are under the governors. But they're called in to celebrate this massive image. Have you ever created a garden and when your friends come over, you're like, hey, come look what I've done. What are we doing? We want someone to say, wow, that's really pretty. Good job. That's really nice. Right? Well, he's made this massive gold image. It's the most powerful man on the face of the planet. And he's calling all of his yes men in. And he wants to celebrate. He wants to pay homage to this wonderful thing. And it's not so much to worship the image, but it's more of a call to an allegiance, more of a pledge to an allegiance. And he says, if you do not do this, if you're not willing to bow down to this image, you will die. And not just die any random normal death. We're going to pitch you into the furnace. We're going to burn you alive. And so in Jeremiah 29:22, it's actually recorded that that is exactly what they would do. They would literally burn them up. They were known, the Babylonians were known for roasting people who disobeyed the rulers and their commands. Now, this event is more political than religious. Remember, Nebuchadnezzar is not a very deeply religious man. He acknowledges the gods. He acknowledged the God of Daniel, but not one time yet has he really acknowledged God as the God, the one and only God. And so it's more about a political movement than a religious movement. And they are to bow at the sound of the orchestra. It always amazes me, like when I used to go to the band concerts for my kids, or if I've been to when you go to an orchestra, like the warm-up is awful, right? Because everybody's hitting their own notes and getting everything sided in. But the moment that the maestro gets up there and pulls it all together, it's absolutely gorgeous. So when I hear this, and it says, you're going to hear the wind instruments, you're going to hear the drums, you're going to hear all these things. But when it all comes together in a symphony, then I want you to bow. So I can imagine as all of these people are gathered, we're not talking about just a couple of people. We're talking maybe hundreds, maybe thousands of people coming together, these rulers. And these music instruments are just kind of playing. They're warming up. And it's probably like a little chaotic and a little awkward. But the moment that it all comes together, it moves them and they fall to their face and worship this image. And it's a lot like what music does for us. It's the reason that some of us like certain hymns or certain worship style music, because it speaks to that inner portion of who we are. Music moves us emotionally. It's meant to connect to us emotionally. And so in this moment, it wants to be this thing for them to be drawn to worship. And so they're going to play music not only as a sign of when it is, but hopefully to connect them to this thing on an emotional level. And this is more like forced allegiance and worship, right? This is really forced. Do it or die. Obviously, when you come into church, we're not standing up there saying, hey, either raise your hands when you sing or you're out. Because I'm not probably going to raise my hands. I'm just not a hand raiser. I've tried. It's awkward and uncomfortable for me. It's not a right or wrong. It's what works for me. And so this is not that. This is forced obedience, forced allegiance. When you hear the music, bow or you die. Our allegiance and our worship should be an expression of our heart. And this thing that he's doing is more of a dedication than anything else. And this image was most likely for self-edification. Most likely, hey, look at me. It was definitely a total rebellion against God, because what did God say in the top 10? No other graven image, worship me only. And here he's putting up a graven image, a gold image at that, and he's saying, let's worship it. And he's also trying to unify all the land together under one totalitarian government. Think about it. He's talking about what did it say in verse 7? All the people, nations, and languages. Remember, this isn't just Babylonian people. These are captives that they have brought in. Remember, there's a lot of Jewish people that were taken captives. I'm sure all of the other places that they had conquered, they brought in the best of the best. So this is a huge melting pot of all kinds of different cultures. And so they're trying to unify them into saying, Babylon is it. This golden image, this is what we're all about. And so if we can get everybody bowing, then we'll know that everybody's on the same page. Now, the question that I'll come to is why? Why does the most powerful king in the world need to build an image and force all of these rulers and leaders to bow to it? Why would that need to happen? Well, even in our own little world, we don't all see eye to eye. We all have different opinions and different thoughts and different wants and desires. And now this king who has conquered lands and brought captives in and says, you're going to serve me, I'm sure battled all the time with different ideologies, different thinking. I mean, look at Daniel. What did Daniel do? Daniel went exactly against what the king had asked for, but it worked out. And so the king probably always was fending off all of these outside influences. And so maybe he's like, you know what? I'm done with that. We're going to get all on the same page. Well, it could be that this actually really did happen right after the dream interpretation. I believe there's evidence to prove otherwise, and we'll see a little bit of that in just a little bit. Another piece of evidence that I believe is that it's telling us that it's a little bit later is that there's a historical document called the Babylonian Chronicles that the Babylonians actually chronicled all the things that took place. They record in 595 BC of December to January of 594 that there was a coup that was attempted. The leaders, the important people, powerful people, maybe a military coup, tried to overtake King Nebuchadnezzar. They wanted to take back their land. And so he battled them and he took them down. This is during the 10th year of his reign. It would make sense, it's plausible, that if that was the case, he gets worried that if that's a coup that happened, maybe there's others that are happening. I need to pull everybody together and unify them into one front and see who really is for me and who really is against me. So I'm going to build this massive image. I'm going to pull all my leaders in. And if they do not bow, then I will know that they are against me and they are out. Very plausible. There's nothing in here in our scripture that tells us that that's what that is. This is outside of biblical studies. This is historical documents that are piecing things together to help us understand why maybe Nebuchadnezzar felt so inclined to build this massive image for himself. So he overthrows the coup, and it's his attempt to unite all that are under him. Now, this presents another dilemma. The dilemma is for Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Why would this be a big dilemma for them? Well, they're Jewish by nature. They've already stood for God in a big way with Daniel, and now they are forced in the face of all of their constituents out in the wide open to either bow to this statue, this image, or stand and possibly die. They had the choice of honor our earthly king and dishonor our heavenly king, or dishonor our earthly king and die, but remain honorable towards our heavenly king. Now, here's what's interesting about that dilemma. We look at this and say, well, that's so easy. I wouldn't have done that. And yet this dilemma happens every day of our life. Every day. Now, you're probably thinking, well, Alan, there's no 90-foot statue out there that we have to bow to. Well, there is. You just don't see it. It's called a TV. It's called social media, politics, you name it, whatever you want to call it. The statues, the images are out there. And we have to battle constantly. Am I going to bow to this image and dishonor the name of Christ? Or am I going to honor the name of Christ and chance what may come my way? It's as simple as that. And I think that's what complicates it for us so much, is because we look at them and say, I can't believe it. Like, that would have been so easy. But it really may not be as easy as we think. But I am amazed when I read the story over and over again at the calmness in these young men and the confidence of these young men. Now, it could be that they could be more, if it's 10 years or 8 years later, it could be more like they are maybe 23 to 28-ish, around there. So they're probably a little bit older. If it really is that this was in the 10th year of his reign, it would have been 8 years after the interpretation of the dream. And they chose wisely. They chose God over man. Another question that you may be wondering is, where's Daniel? I mean, this dude is the man. Where is he? He's not mentioned once in chapter 3. And if all of the important people are called in, why didn't Daniel come? He's elevated above. Well, here are some assumptions. We're not completely sure. But a couple of assumptions. Number one is, it could be because he was a major player in the king's court. Like, he's way up there. If the coup thing is accurate and it connects to the story, it very well could be that Daniel was a major player in disrupting this coup. And if he was, then Daniel did not need to prove his allegiance to King Nebuchadnezzar, because he had already done that in disrupting this coup. Again, assumption. Do not hear me say truth. It's an assumption. It's a fitting puzzle that can work together that's plausible. Everybody hearing me on this, right? Okay, just making sure, because I don't want you leaving here and say, well, my Bible didn't say that. He's preaching heresy. No, I'm not. I'm just giving you information. It's commonly believed that he was most likely off on business. Because of his leadership and what he was able to do, it's most likely that he was off doing something else somewhere else. Again, we don't know. We're not sure. Another question that always comes up for me is, well, what about the other Jewish captives? These 4 guys weren't the only Jewish captives that were taken. However, these are the only 4 Jewish captives that we see that were elevated into a place of prominence that would have had the responsibility to go and pay homage to this image. So, were the other Jews there? We don't know. All we know is these men were there. Does that make sense? So, any questions or thoughts or comments about the first 7 verses?
Yeah, I find it really interesting. We're just talking about, you're talking about a possible coup, right?
Yeah.
And I'm thinking about the size of this statue, right? And, given the period of time, I mean, there's no machinery, I mean, it's simple tools and stuff, right? So at 9 foot, and given the dimensions, that's, if it's made of plated gold, that's 810 square feet of gold that has to be hammered out. Mined first.
Yep.
Hammered out. So.
And then lifted up.
And then lifted up. So you got all this stuff that's going on. So he did that for a reason. He had to commit a lot of resources, time, and manpower to to send this message. So there had to have been a solid reason for it.
A reaction.
Yeah.
Why did he react so strongly?
It's serious,
Yep.
because this is not just like, oh, well, some of these people don't like me, and then, frivolously make this giant statue. It's something, I think that's probably more plausible because of that.
Sure.
Because the resources went into making that.
Right. That's a great point, that the resources invested, time invested, there had to be a reason for him to react in such a way to do this, and a coup makes sense. It's plausible. Charlie, what were you going to share?
This is the Nebuchadnezzar in chapter 2. King Nebuchadnezzar prostrate before Daniel, paid him honor. The king said to Daniel, surely your God is the God of gods and the Lord of kings. This is the same Nebuchadnezzar. People forget.
Yes. And I'm glad you said that. Charlie brings up in chapter 2 where Nebuchadnezzar literally bows down and says, you are the King of Kings and God of gods. And that helps. It gives more evidence for me to let me know that this is later on, because you can't say that and then, well, you can, but it's very unlikely to make a claim like that, come right back around and say, well, I'm going to build it. Yeah. And I would imagine too, Charlie, that the dream probably played in a lot with him, understanding what that dream means. Then if the coup was there, but that dream just marinating in there, he's like, well, I'm going to get ahead of the game. I'm going to do this. Yeah. Tom?
I think, like, it's still, it's going to take years to make a statue anyway.
Yes.
But, I think it could also be that, he's always surrounded by angry people in general. They can get into his head. It's like, hey, look, you're the one on top in the gold. Whatever comes after you is not going to affect you at all. So since you're the gold on top, you the gold on top and do whatever.
Could be. It could be. Because I would imagine this dream permeated all over the place once it got out. And it could be that they came right around him and said, oh, don't just stop there. Do it all. You're the greatest.
Right.
Do whatever you want to do.
And it's going to be however many centuries down the line it is. It's not going to affect you.
Yep. That's true. That's true. That's a good point. Yeah, Phil?
He said, these three guys, death wasn't a consideration. They knew that God would either deliver them from death and death.
Yes.
And I think that's an example that we need to have that same type of attitude today that they had. God will deliver them either from death or in death.
Yes, it's such a great point, and you must have read my notes already because that's where we're heading. But that is such a great point, because it's not no. Listen, that's a point that we can make every single time somebody's going to talk about this story, because it's the exact truth. And if we could ever get to the place where death doesn't even faze us anymore, it wasn't even a consideration. They did not hesitate in their answer. There was no, hey, give us a minute, let's talk. Like, it didn't matter. Their answer is probably one of my most favorite answers in Scripture when somebody's asked a question, because it's so confident, so bold, so matter of fact. So do what you want. I don't care. Like, it's no big deal. That's good. Thanks, Phil. Bill?
I think of the seed that got planted on the side of the road and we
Mm-hmm.
and I see that seed as his answer.
Yeah.
But yet he got in his head probably about the dream.
Yes.
How great it is. And
Those thorns jumped up and choked it. Yes.
and
That's good. That's good. That's good. Pulling together the New Testament and Old Testament. That's good. Because the seed is the most important thing. And when we don't take care of our ground, those thorns will pop up real fast. And that's kind of what you were talking about, Charlie, is it's so quick. I mean, whether it's 1 year or 8 years, it's still quick. Like, that was a big statement he made. Ann?
Well, I was just thinking that Nebuchadnezzar did not want to lose Daniel. He did not want to lose. He knew how valuable he was.
Mm-hmm.
So he probably knew, and he knew what Daniel would do. He knew that Daniel
That's a great point.
would not bow.
Mm-hmm.
And more losers, he made sure he was.
That is a great point, Ann. That's a really good point, because Daniel really is valuable to him. I mean, he's so valuable, he elevated him so high, but he also knew Daniel's faith and the fact that exactly.
He could predict Daniel's response. He wasn't so sure about the other three,
Sure.
but he knew what Daniel
That's interesting. Yep. And sent him away intentionally to protect his investment, really. Yes, ma'am.
So, if we're going back to how long it took to build this,
Yeah.
so you're looking at like, 1,000 monument
Mm.
years. And gold all the way around it. So, how long it took to build this, don't you think Daniel reflected on this for a long time?
I'm sure.
What does this monument mean?
Mhm.
He probably knew too.
Sure.
But going back to Nebuchadnezzar, his prideful self, when the sun hit that, all the way around it reflected.
Yes.
It shined from him.
Sure.
It's good.
That's really good. Yeah, I agree. I think Daniel probably did contemplate quite a bit. I mean, he had years to contemplate it and maybe even had conversations with the king, which is maybe goes back to what Ann was suggesting, that he's like, you know what, when this celebration comes, why don't you go over there and do that so I can enjoy this process? Sure. Anybody else? Yes, sorry.
I was thinking that, he's very secure.
Yes.
And he did not have the respect of all the other Hebrews. So when that came out as a dream, it was like, I was thinking more along the lines of, okay, now I'm gonna build a gold statue, because everybody knows about this dream, and I want these leaders to constantly remember that I'm.
Yeah, it could be. Could be that he was a little insecure because he's just going through and whooping everybody. And that just breeds contempt. And so when this dream gets out, he's like, you know what? Okay, they know. So I'm just going to prove that I'm the man. I'm going to build a bigger, better statue than what my dream was. I'm going to make it all gold. Good point.
I think at this point in the story,
Yeah.
Nebuchadnezzar is a fascist. If you frame it out in comparison to Nazi Germany, and think about that culture and how that society was at that time and how much fear, terrorizing happened to the citizenry. It just kind of made me think, like, I hear the same things here. Like, okay, well, he's in charge. It's all about him and obedience to Nebuchadnezzar. If you don't, you're going to get destroyed.
Sure.
Right? So just, it made me think, like, what was your society like?
Mm-hmm.
What would that be like?
Sure. So what I hear you saying is
There's a parallel there.
history continues to roll back around.
There's a parallel there.
There's nothing new under the sun. Just rears its ugly head in a little bit different spot. It's interesting. Yes, Tatiana.
I have a great conflict, but he did a good comment, whatever, just the first chapter 3, he says, after anyone interprets the dream, if he fell and then acknowledge that Daniel's knowledge is about God, but it's not enough to intellectually acknowledge the existence of God. You need to be born again.
Mm-hmm.
Born a new design for one.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, well, I mean, James even says that the devils even acknowledge that God exists. So just acknowledging it doesn't mean anything. And that's kind of where Nebuchadnezzar kind of got caught up.
Saying God one thing, ourselves for the center of
Yeah. It's a whole nother process. Absolutely. Yes, I'm sorry. Mm.
Because of the law, it is used to bring to knowledge of sin, these comments Jesus to the list of worship.
Yep. Sure. Yes. And I'm glad you said it that way. It becomes religion over relationship. And that's big difference. Big difference.
Really quick, I just read a little bit about the people who suffer for Christ, and these people in different countries actually, but they actually believe in Christ and stuff, and they suffer, and they ask them, how they feel about it, and they said that their own suffering proves that Jesus is God, because he told them in the Bible.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. And that honestly plays into what Hannah and I, Michelle, and Azariah are getting ready to say. Great. This is great. This is going to glorify God either way. So let it happen. That's awesome. Anybody else? Yes, ma'am.
The other Jewish.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
They didn't make a decision in the beginning to follow the law. They're less likely to make the decision.
It's a great point. It could be that those guys, yeah, because again, we don't know how many Jewish boys went, but to make the assumption that it was only 4 of them is probably not a wise assumption. So those 4, though, made the call of, we're going to stick to our guns. We're going to stay true to who we are. Doesn't mean those other guys are awful. It just means they were in a different spot and didn't follow the way that correct. Anybody else? Good discussion. That's just the first 7 verses of a story we all know. Isn't it fun? I love it. All right, let's get to the good stuff. 8 through 18. Therefore, at that time, certain Chaldeans came forward and accused the Jews. They spoke and said to the king, or to King Nebuchadnezzar, O king, live forever. You, O king, have made a decree that everyone who hears the sound of the horn, flute, harp, lyre, and psaltery, and symphony, with all kinds of music, shall fall down and worship the gold image, and whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast into the midst of a burning fiery furnace. There are certain Jews whom you have set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, have not paid due regard to you. They do not serve your gods or worship the gold image which you have set up. Then Nebuchadnezzar, in rage and fury, gave the command to bring Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So they brought these men before the king. Nebuchadnezzar spoke, saying to them, Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you did not serve my gods or worship the gold image which I have set up? Now, if you're ready at the time you hear the sound of the horn, flute, harp, lyre, and psaltery, and symphony with all kinds of music, and you fall down and worship the image which I have made, good. But if you don't, if you do not worship, you shall be cast immediately into the midst of a burning fiery furnace. And who is the God who will deliver you from my hands? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. If that is the case, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us from your hand, O king. But if not, let it be known to you, O king, that we do not serve your gods, nor will we worship the gold image which you have set up. I just saw in verse 18, notice they said nothing against the king. These guys are trying to make it personal between these Jewish men and the king. It's not personal between them. This is a spiritual attack, and they are simply saying, we just can't worship another God. We'll serve you, king. That's why we're here. God's put us here. We'll do it, but we can't worship these golden images. I love that. So we see that these young men were quickly ratted out. And notice that it says certain Chaldeans. These are most likely watchers, people that were probably standing around in the crowd, maybe just surveying the crowd, watching to see who wasn't going to bow, who was going to bow, watching for maybe body reaction. Who knows? But they were most likely skilled watchers to inform the king of what was going on. And maybe it was just pure jealousy. Maybe they just hated these young men. These dudes came out of nowhere. They came out of a different culture. They have excelled very, very well. And now they are been promoted, but now they're going against the king. So here's our chance. And who knows, again, if this is 8 years later, what has transpired to create this bigger avenue of jealousy maybe than we can even see. And so these young men are accused of rebellion against the king. Is it really rebellion against the king? No. But just like the world we live in, things are always taken out of context to make it sound what they want it to sound like. They were regarded as disloyal and dishonoring the king, but the rebellion was more towards the statue than anything else. It wasn't against the king. Granted, it was rebellion against the king's command, but it wasn't a personal rebellion. It was a spiritual thing of, I just can't do this. And the king, which I love, gives them the benefit of the doubt. Again, this is further evidence for me that they had garnered all of this trust with him. That doesn't happen overnight. if this was right after the dream, they had just been elevated. And so there's not a lot of time to get some trust from a king to say, okay, if you don't bow, you're going in the furnace. Well, guys, listen, I'm going to give you another chance. This is the most powerful king in the world. He didn't care about second chances. But in this instance, I believe because of the integrity of these three men, their leadership abilities, their qualities, this king was like, seriously? I mean, listen to it. Listen to what he says. Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you did not serve my gods or worship the gold image which I've set up for you? That doesn't sound like an angry guy in that moment. It's more of like, I've entrusted a lot with you. I've invested a lot in you. We've got a good working relationship here. Like, I've got a lot of trust in you. You haven't disappointed me yet. You do what I've asked you to do. What's going on? Like, what's happening here? Like, can you hear that questioning? But then it does turn at some point. These are major leaders. He gives them a second chance. And when he gives them a second chance, most people would want to say that King Nebuchadnezzar is weak. This is not a sign of weakness. This is a sign of in my mind, a genuine caring man of, these are my guys. Like, they've done really well for me. I don't want to just throw them in a fiery furnace, but I did make decrees, so I've got to do something. And it's more like for me, seriously, guys, come on, seriously. And he challenges their God again. Listen to this statement. And who is the God who will deliver you from my hands? Charlie, what was that verse you just read a minute ago? Your God is the God of God and King of kings. Who's the God that's going to deliver you out of my hands? How quickly the roles reverse. So fast. So fast. Again, further evidence that time has passed. And his anger blinds him from what he had already acknowledged. You ever get that way? You get so mad you forget everything that you already knew? And you blaze a new trail. Right? Yeah. And so why was this? Why did he say, and whose hands, or what God's hands, excuse me. And who is the God who will deliver you from my hands? Why does he ask that question? Well, we know, because he asks, is this true? Is what these men saying about you, is it true? Is it true you won't bow down? Is it true you won't follow my commands? Now, they're trying to play it off as they just don't like you. They're disloyal to you. And again, if we go back to the idea that there's a coup going on, maybe they're playing into, these guys are a part of it. They're going to do another one. Again, assumption. Careful. Could it be that the same men whom he has trusted so close could dishonor him? I can see the dilemma that this king is waging with himself. For the last 8 years, if that's how long it's been, they haven't done nothing wrong. They've done everything that he's asked them to do, and probably more so. And now this one thing in his mind, he's probably confused as, wait. What they're telling me can't be, because I know the integrity of this men. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, is this true? And their answer is, yeah, it is. It just makes me giggle. Like, they don't, what would we do? We would say, you know what, can you give me just a minute and let me talk with my friends? Let's make sure we got our facts straight, right? They don't even, I bet they didn't even look at each other. One of them probably just spoke up and said, yeah, it is. It's true. Sorry. It is. We can't do that. We're actually not going to do that, King. And such boldness and calmness and confidence, just to look him straight. Seriously, most powerful king in the world. Bow or die, and they're standing nose to nose with this dude. Yeah, King, sorry, it really is true. What these guys are telling you, that we didn't bow, that we're not going to bow, guilty. They admit the truth. And I love how they admit it. They say, oh, Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. It's not a smart aleck response saying, hey, we're not going to give you an answer to this question. It means, King, you already know. You know who we are. You know where we came from. You know our background. We've talked about this. Daniel probably told you already that you can build this thing, but it's not going to go well for you. Like, you already knew. So you can ask us this question, but you really don't need us to answer. You already know. The problem is he couldn't understand it. Even though in chapter 2, 8 years before, he said, hey, I recognize your God is awesome, but now he's at the place of, whose God's going to save you now? He couldn't understand it. And here's what I really love about this passage, because in chapter 3, Daniel's not mentioned. In Daniel chapter 1, verse 8, we find Daniel leading the charge of making the play of how they're going to move forward. I'm not going to do what is spiritually unfit for me. Let me come up with something else. And these other 3 men go along with it. And it works out for them. Fast forward, now the dream is here. Daniel says, I don't want to die. I know God can help me. Give me a moment and we will come back with the dream and the interpretation. We'll figure this out. And they go to the Lord together. And what an experience. Have you ever bonded with somebody over a spiritual experience? It's a tighter, stronger bond than you can have anywhere else. And these men, in the face of death, sought the Lord out and heard from him and saved so many lives because of their faithfulness to God and God's faithfulness to them. Amazing. And so now, 8 years forward, Daniel's off doing Daniel stuff. And these 3 guys are on their own, and they are summoned to this massive plain in front of this massive image and challenged in their faith to bow or die. And without hesitation, they stand their ground. Now that's doable. We can do that. In a crowd, we can kind of feel like nobody's going to see us. We'll just kind of do our thing. But now they're standing in front of the king. And the king says, what you have to say for yourself. And they say, nothing. Nothing. So not only did they learn from their past experience with Daniel and the interpretation of the dream, but they followed his lead in this and they stood their ground on their own. The reason I love that is I may not always be around, but I hope that the things that I've taught you, the things that I've preached to you, the things that I've modeled for you will help you in a moment where you got to stand your ground. Because I know there are men in my life and moms in my life that I can go back to and remember the things that they taught me, to where when I feel like I'm standing alone in a crowded room, I can stand confidently because I know what I'm standing for. And these 3 men exemplify it to a T what it should look like for us. I love this story because it is so appropriate for where we are today. We're going to be alone in a big way. It's just going to continue to be that way. But we're really not. Because wherever I'm standing, I know you're going to be standing somewhere else. So I won't be standing alone. We'll always be standing with somebody, right? So I love that they trusted their own faith in this instance. Any comments or thoughts on this one? This is seriously just my favorite part. And we're not even at the really good stuff yet. Yes, you're on my blind side. Sorry.
No, I was thinking that, we thought that Daniel was left on his own. God removed Daniel.
It could be.
Because when King Nebuchadnezzar saw him interpret the dream, he immediately thought about Daniel. So that again, Daniel was in this. It would be about Daniel. But now you have several Jewish people that weren't Daniel, and they get the same response from the same God to protect.
That could be. It could be that God moved Daniel out of this to prove to King Nebuchadnezzar that it's not just about Daniel. I'm not just Daniel's God. I'm also these 3 men's God, because he's going to show up in a big way. I mean, we obviously know the story, but it's massive. Yeah, Bill.
I like the parallel this has to Esther with Mordecai.
Yes.
And, you got to bow down before Haman. You got to bow down before Haman. And for Mordecai, and as well as these 3 guys, it's like there was no plan B.
Right.
Like that. No. Like that's just the way that it is, and I'm not gonna try to give you a political answer, I'm not gonna try to dance around, I'm not gonna try to save my neck. The answer is just no.
Right.
And like what you said earlier about the, we may not always have the statue in front of us, but we've got tons of things that are analogy to the statue.
Sure.
And can we know? Can we just know? And be able to discern and that sort of thing. And I know for me, that's really, really tough. Because
Sure.
man, you rationalize all kinds of stuff.
Real quick.
Real quick. So that's it. Just this part of the story stood out to me with Mordecai.
That's a really good correlation there between Esther and Mordecai, because that's exactly what she had to do, what he had to do. Really. I mean, she could have went before the king and died, but she made the decision like, I'm going. I'm doing it. She had to think about it a little bit, but
Yeah. Well,
but these guys didn't have a choice. Like, it's instant. She still had the opportunity to think through, let me develop a plan how I'm going to get there. I don't think she hesitated in it, but she had a little time. These guys don't. Like, music hits. You going to tie your shoe? Like,
well, that's even with Mordecai. Like I think he got a couple of chances.
yes, it was more than once.
To bow down, and then he had Esther kind of intercede for him.
Yes.
But it was just that, like, okay.
Yeah.
It ain't gonna happen.
Yeah, and I think Haman probably intentionally walked by him every day just to see. Where's he at? Who else? Yes.
To almost piggyback on that, you've got Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego,
Mm-hmm.
and people in quasi power coming to mention that. You've got Haman and Mordecai.
Mm-hmm.
You have the Sadducees and the Pharisees
Yeah.
of Jesus. It's the people that are in power that Satan just says, hey.
Yep, you're powerful.
He's
Yep.
going to take
Yep.
over your spot.
You're right.
And they just run with it.
Yeah, it runs all throughout biblical history.
They hate truth. That's what it is.
Yes.
And our culture today hates truth.
Yes. The hatred for truth has always been around, and it always shows up between good and evil.
Stalin and the Jews.
Yes.
I mean, it's
Yep.
just-
Yep. Yes, dear.
What I was gonna say is, they were saving the next. They were because they had to God.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Or
In fact, they saved their necks in a bigger way by choosing God over their own life. Absolutely. Yeah. In fact, Jesus talked about that in one of the sermons that a couple years back of like, don't worry about those that can take your physical life. Worry about the one that can deal with your soul. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
I like the way, just like when Daniel said, I mean, like, we're giving decision about eating food and stuff. They didn't go to a lot of other people and say, hey, let's not eat that.
Right.
In the same year, Shadrach,
Personal decision.
Meshach, and Abednego did not gather
That's
all
really
the
good.
people around them to say, support them.
Right. That's a great point, because I think sometimes we want that comfort in numbers. And the reality is this whole walk, this is an individual decision that God graciously allows us to do as a group. But whether you stand or not, I'm responsible for me. Charlie and I have always talked about, as for me and my house, you can do whatever you want, but we're going to serve the Lord. Yes, ma'am.
on that point, when they did the meat, it seemed that that's a smaller matter than facing the furnace. And maybe a lot less pressure, there's crowds. And
Sure.
food loss, and, that probably built their faith because they were obedient and the outcome was.
Yes.
The outcome. And, I always tell people in my family, what's God calling us to do? What are we gonna do? We're always looking for that thing, but it's in all the little decisions we make all day long, where our faith is. And that's the big thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's those little things create.
Yes, it's such a great point. And I do agree. I think the whole food thing to us probably seems insignificant because we don't really think in that terminology. For them, it was a big deal, but it was still a small decision to make. But we don't know for those 8 years all the other little small decisions that they had to make to get them to this place that in the face of this entire crowd, I'm not going to bow down. Sorry, I'm just not going to do it. And I can even look back at my own life and see all the little things, all the decisions that I made that probably weren't popular decisions. Maybe cost me some friends, but I think I turned out okay. I kind of like where I'm at.
Yeah, but those are the things.
Yes.
That is what it's
It
about.
prepares you for that next big thing.
Yeah,
Yep.
and that is what builds faith.
Absolutely.
In
100%.
not compromising.
Sure. Yes.
Yeah.
James?
I'm really just piggybacking.
Sure. That's great.
Having the same conversation.
That pig is about 10 levels high right now. I said that pig is about 10 levels high.
I was just thinking about the fact that you never called all the leaders
Mm-hmm.
of the provinces. So, yeah, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, well, these are probably their co-workers.
Yeah, yeah.
They knew them. They're like you said, the leader.
Yeah.
They're the leaders that Nebuchadnezzar has. And these are powerful people. And all of a sudden, they're all gathered.
Yes.
They're on the plane. And you're the only one not down to that kind of peer pressure.
So that is a great thought. Yes. So you've got 3 men out of this massive group of their cohorts. Here's a thought I just had. We always assume they're standing together. They may be spread out all over the place and didn't know where each one were. And they could have been one over there, one over there, and one over here. I've always assumed that they were all 3 together holding each other accountable. And what if they weren't? Didn't know what the other 3 were going to do. Huh. That's interesting. That changes the game a little bit for me if that's the case. Because that's even, like, when I stand with you guys, it's easy for me to be confident because I know you're behind me. When I'm by myself, I still know you're behind me, but it's just different. It's a little harder. And if they were by themselves, man, that changes the game for me. Big time. It increases their level of trust and confidence in their God even more than what I thought they already had. That's very interesting, actually.
They probably discussed it then. Of what are we gonna do?
Maybe.
I would have, like,
And that's true, because it could have been a decree that came out months before,
yeah.
and maybe they communicated, say, hey, let's meet in the southwest corner, or hey, what are you going to do? Or hey, I don't know what you're going to do, but here's what I'm going to do. Like, so there may have been a discussion, there may not. It's fun to try to figure out and think that all this possible scenarios of really how this played out and the magnitude of this decision. Because I can imagine, let's say it was our church and other churches, and I'm standing here with my team, and they all bow. I don't, which would never happen. But I would imagine them pulling on my robe saying, Alan, what are you doing? Alan. So if they're standing there individually with their coworkers, I would imagine these guys are pleading with them like, please don't do this. Like, I know your faith, I know you're strong, but just tie your shoe for a moment. Like, do something. Like, don't do this. Like, there's a lot of scenarios here that play in that we don't consider. We just read the story and think, oh yeah, that was so easy for them. They just didn't do it. Had to be tough. Had to be tough.
There's something here, and I'm going to bounce off something Charlie said about how quickly
Mm-hmm.
God, I mean, you go to page right before here, you
Yeah.
get prostrate.
Yeah. Face down.
Like he's giving it up. Like he's like, all
Yep.
right, don't look,
Yeah.
God's God. But then you come over here, and the way this written, I had to look it up just to make sure it wasn't crazy. And who is the God?
Wait, where you at? Oh, verse 15?
Yes.
Yep.
Who is the God who
Yeah.
will deliver you from my hands? And it read plural to me,
Mm.
right? And the fact that God is lowercase g, Nebuchadnezzar
Again,
referring to the-
God's. Yep.
The Chaldeans were polytheistic.
Yep.
So he's asking them, which one of these gods is going to save you from my hand?
Yeah, he totally has just blanked.
Completely forget.
But part of that is his anger. Because of his emotional response, he blanks on what he knows and has already previously acknowledged. Just like when we get angry, we blank on what we know we're supposed to be doing. And so that's very interesting that, yeah, he forgets so fast. So fast. Poor guy.
You went from laying on the ground in awe to now you're back to your
Mini gods.
little fake gods.
Right? Yeah.
Your lowercase g God.
Yes.
And that's where you're at. I don't know, that, like I said, it just.
It's interesting. Sure. Charlie?
In this passage, when the Chaldeans come, they say, "O king, live forever." It's the same thing that the astrologers said back in chapter 2.
It is.
"O king, live forever." And so what they're basically saying is, you are our king, live forever. Whatever that means.
Right.
So when the Chaldeans answer, they say, "Oh, Nebuchadnezzar, I acknowledge you as their king. We never go on life, not going to live forever. These guys can play whatever game they want."
Right.
And in the answer, in 15, he says, "My God."
Yep.
In 17, he says, "The God you serve, have with you."
Right.
That should be our answer.
Yes, that's really good. That's cool.
So if these guys that ratted them out, saw them standing, and they want to bow down here, they get thrown in the serve furnace?
It depends. It depends on if their job, no, right, but if their job was specifically because they were his chief assistants, their job may have specifically been to just kind of stand up around and watch.
Like he did when everybody prayed.
Yeah, right. He didn't close his eyes. Oh, yeah? How'd you know? Awesome. Great discussion tonight. Yes, ma'am. Yes, Tatiana. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Sure. Yes, it does. Mm-hmm. Sure. That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that. Anybody else? Yeah, Tom.
So, I know that Daniel and the king have had a lot of connections together. But I'm curious on how much his three friends, Shadrach, Meshach,
Sure.
and Abednego, had with friends. Because even in the chapter 4, they're referenced to the king as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, not their Hebrew name.
Right. Yep.
So I'm thinking maybe the king says, "Oh well, he has these three friends. He wants to look at them, pick them up," not necessarily knowing that they're Jewish, since he's assimilated so many other groups
Sure.
of people.
Sure.
So I think maybe it could be that he's not forgotten Daniel's God, but he's like,
Right.
"Well, who are you? Who are yours?" Because maybe I didn't know that they were Jewish. Because
Sure.
he was referenced to
It could be. The only thing that I would maybe throw at that would be because of Daniel chapter 1, where they all, just those guys ate of the water and vegetables, because they impressed him based on their knowledge. I mean, it talks about that those 4 men impressed him based on the way that they looked and their knowledge of their education. And so I think there's a little bit more playing in there, but I do agree. I think those men were elevated because of Daniel, not because of what they did. So I do think, I agree, the connection is probably stronger between Nebuchadnezzar and Daniel rather than Nebuchadnezzar and these 3 men. But the fact that he gave them a second chance in the face of death tells me that there's probably a little more than maybe we even know. Because there's that 8 years, if there's that 8 years, a lot could have taken place that we don't know. But that's a great thought. It's a good point. All right, so we'll finish chapter 3 next week. All right, let me pray for you. God, you are good as always, and I love when you unpack new things. God, thank you for the great discussion and excitement of this story. God, it is a story that we all know very well, all the way back from when we were little. But Lord, it is so appropriate for this day and time and so good and meaty. So thank you for showing up in a big way tonight. Thanks for all that you do. I pray for the concerns of our hearts and the things that are on our minds, the people that are on our minds that are struggling or maybe health-wise having issues or just things that are kind of out of our control. Help us to be at peace with what you are doing. Help us to trust you and help us to go after you in all things. We love you, praise you, thank you in Jesus' name. Amen. Have a great night. We will see you next week. You can leave that